all so much for joining, and as we wait for a few more people to trickle in, please feel free to settle in. We have a really exciting panel tonight, or this morning, and we're really excited to hear all of your thoughts and to hear from our amazing speakers.
Welcome to everyone to this 100% clean energy panel on climate action, day of Climate Week. This would be a day when we would be out marching for climate normally. I am Ken Jones, the Clean Energy Campaign Lead for 350 Bay Area, a climate action group which, along with groups in this panel, is fighting at the Public Utilities Commission for microgrids in their rulemaking on that. We are certainly in a climate emergency, and if we had already achieved the 100% goal, we probably wouldn't be. If you came from the Zoom link from the session with Mark Jacobson speaking, you heard him talk about the big picture of getting there in California and the world to some degree. There certainly needs to be more political will to get there faster. This panel explores what we could do locally, what we should be doing to modernize the electricity system in California and how that can get us closer to that 100% goal faster and in a better way than has been happening, especially in light of climate breakdown. We will also hear about the programs that have grown up out of our communities that now cover the whole Bay Area that are helping to get us to a more modernized system with much more renewable energy. I am lucky to have convinced this great group of panelists who are all people who have long been active in local community electric power generation and advocacy. And so I want to introduce, first of all, our Zoom tech person, Ruth Aub, who is quite an activist in her own right with the community group in Alameda for Sustainable Alameda, and is president of Zero Waste USA. And Yusra Arup, who is going to be our moderator, and she's a second-year student in urban affairs at UC Berkeley. Both of them are quite good at what they do. And so I'm going to turn it over to Yusra to moderate from here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ken, for that introduction, and good morning, everybody. This is an amazing day that we get to celebrate Indian history, as we saw at the opening plenary, but also get to talk about clean energy this morning. Before we go ahead and jump in, I'd like to introduce our first panelist. Ken and I had the opportunity to meet with our speakers one-on-one beforehand, and it's been a really amazing experience for me as a student to kind of get to know them and get to know their backgrounds. And I can assure you that they have incredible insight to share this morning. So I'd like to introduce first Kurt Johnson. Kurt Johnson has worked in renewable energy policy and project development for almost 30 years, including working at Recurrent Energy, which is the California PUC and the US EPA. Kurt started his career working on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., working for the US Representative Richard Sweat, focused on energy policy. So Kurt, please feel free to take it away. And I will stop my share, that way you can share yours.
Thanks very much. Pleased to be here this morning. I'll whip through a little bit about the Climate Center and Climate Safe California, and talk about context, and then our vision for the future of the electricity system, and why we think that is sort of the vision that ought to animate clean energy policy, not only in California but worldwide. So, brief introduction. The Climate Center, we are a statewide nonprofit climate and energy policy organization, perhaps best known for our work in propagating community choice agencies across the state. As you know, our local, we're actually based in the North Bay, Marine Clean Energy, the first in the state, and CCAs are now propagating rapidly across California. In the last year or so, we have developed our next flagship program called Climate Safe California, the premise of which is existing state goals to reduce our emissions are simply inconsistent with the commensurate speed that science requires us to reduce our emissions. If you look at, the SB 100 target, 2045, and all these other emissions reduction targets tend to have a 2045, 2050 timeline, which is simply not fast enough relative to what scientists are telling us we need to do in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. To date, we've got almost 600 folks endorsing. So I'll put it in the chat in a minute. We're seeking endorsements of the Climate Safe California campaign. Join Congressman Jared Huffman, State Senator Henry Stern, Hollywood actor Ed Begley Jr., UC Berkeley professor Dan Kamen, and hundreds of others in endorsing Climate Safe California. The goal is to provide, I guess the way to put it, political cover to help Governor Newsom advance a more aggressive climate agenda, building on what happened yesterday. Obviously, that was a great step in transportation. We outlined a much more aggressive executive order proposal, which is on our website, which calls for 2030, including things like taking the existing 100% target of 2045 for California and moving that to 2030. Anyway, so that's our flagship program. I manage the Community Energy Resilience Program, which is a subset of Climate Safe California, which I'm going to be talking about here this morning. So just the context, people are probably all familiar with what happened. 2019 was horrific in terms of its impacts. And interestingly, I live in Marin County. We had cell towers shut down, which was sort of unexpected by a lot of people. So that was crazy. Well, 2020 was obviously apocalyptic, and we see this as a great opportunity to advance an aggressive political agenda. In fact, I might posit that, but for the events of the last month, we may not have seen the aggressive executive order from Governor Newsom on transportation earlier this week. So, how do we get here? What do we do about it? So the vision of our Community Energy Resilience Program is to create an entirely new energy system. We've got a 100-year-old grid infrastructure based on electricity flowing one way, from a central station, and the energy is flowing one way. We envision an entirely new, built from the bottom up electricity infrastructure. I'll just run through a couple things. This is a microgrid ring connected more broadly to the broader grid. So there's obviously some PV. There could be myriad generation options. There's questions about whether any individual community might have sufficient space for that, but that's the idea. You have the ability to share power locally. This is not currently legal in California, but the idea is that within this community, microgrid resources are shared. There's a little control person here. The question is, who is that? Is that a CCA? Is that PG&E? Is that a local government entity? Is that a private sector entity? Lots of interesting questions. And this is a huge amount of new distributed energy infrastructure. Mark talked about how their vision for 100% included a whole lot of rooftop solar, distributed generation connected. Well, that's going to require local governments to be front and center in passing general plans, land use codes to authorize and enable and make a priori legal all this new distributed generation. So there needs to be support for local governments to do all this planning. But that's the vision of where we want to get to. A couple more specifics on how we get there. The CEC has been doing some work in recent years to promote microgrids. The relatively small number that have been funded and built to date in California relative to the tens of thousands of critical facilities in California. But there is starting to be some literature associated with California experiences to date. Obviously, there's a huge amount of money. Well, SB 700, people are familiar with the Self-Generation Incentive Program that's authorized at about $1 billion through 2024. That's a key element of that can be leveraged to build this new future we want to build. this should also harness all this mobile storage. So Governor Newsom said he wants to basically make it illegal to sell a gasoline-powered car by 2035. That's great. If there's a vast increase in the amount of electric vehicles, that is a vast mobile storage asset which could be utilized as a grid resource on a daily basis by grid managers for load shifting, taking excess solar and shifting it to peak periods in the evening. And then, of course, that could all become a resilience asset as well. We just need to have the regulatory infrastructure to make it create a way for electric vehicle owners to provide this grid resilience and local daily load shifting resilience assets. We have to have a whole new regulatory paradigm in order to get there, but certainly that can be done. And we think that we need to prioritize building this new grid of the future in California's low-income disadvantaged communities first. The Cal Enviro screen, this is just a snapshot. It ranks all communities based on pollution exposure as well as economic conditions. And the bottom line point of this graphic is that we need to spend a lot of public dollars in making this clean energy resilience first and foremost in historically disadvantaged low-income communities in California. So that's the big vision of where we're trying to go. How do we get there? So we've come up with various proposed policies. We need to have a new state level program. Well, first of all, we need state level commitment to resilient communities. That's a policy pillar of our Climate Safe California campaign. And we need support for local governments in order to do this new local planning that will need to be done in order to approve and accelerate all this local distributed energy resource development. And we also have to have an entirely new model for what the utility looks like. And that basically we need to transform to a system where utilities are sort of wires only companies, and we open up entirely the local distribution system so that there is a local electricity marketplace which can be accessed by anyone, analogous to what we currently have as an open transmission level open marketplace. And that's something we've been working on in this country for a long time. We need to take that same level of openness and move it to the distribution level to enable thousands, millions of individual energy prosumers is the term, to participate and provide benefits to the broader grid when they can. I guess Ann's going to be talking a little bit about that. We worked on a couple of bills to affect this vision this year in the legislature, SB 1314, authored by Bill Dodd, and SB 1240, authored by Senator Skinner. I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on SB 1314. The idea here is to create, as I say, a new state program that would support local governments in doing this kind of community energy resilience planning, involving, obviously the distribution utility, people, neighborhood CCAs, technology providers, and getting to a plan for building out all this new distributed energy. What have we been doing in 2020? Like I said, we've been working in three principal areas: budgetary, legislative, and regulatory. This year's fiscal notwithstanding all the dramatic cutbacks, there was $50 million. It went to California Office of Emergency Services. The hope is that's not going to continue to be funding state governments in building diesel generators. That's something that happened based on the $75 million that was allocated last fiscal year. We authored a couple of bills. As I said, those were pulled because of COVID. However, both authors have indicated an interest in reintroducing in 2021. And then we've been very actively involved in the SB 1339 proceeding before the PUC, which also known as the microgrid proceeding. In June of this year, the commission issued a so-called track 1 decision that we were grateful to see included a lot of the recommendations we and our coalition partners had filed, calling on the IOUs to make a lot of information available to local governments to do the kind of planning needed, and sort of recognizing that there is a new pivotal role of local governments in developing new distributed energy resources. So that was a great first step, but we're now on to so-called track 2, which needs to be completed by the end of the calendar year, at least initiated. The most important part of that is creation of tariffs to send appropriate market signals to actually make it economically possible for local governments to do this kind of planning, and even focusing initially on behind the meter installations there has to be a market signal to make this future possible. Unfortunately, what's been happening now is the focus has all been on kind of the same old top-down view that, oh, let's just, rely on PG&E to handle it for us. Relying on PG&E to sort of handle it, I think, is planning to fail. And it basically, it reflects a whole sort of historical mindset that's been around for 100 years that the utilities are going to handle it. Well, that's proven not to work in recent years. So we need the Track 2 decision to come out with a specific economic signal to make this new future possible. This is a screenshot of a social media campaign that's just getting one underway, in fact, this week, hoping to influence policymakers both in Sacramento and at the PUC in San Francisco, that we can create a new, better future based on distributed energy. For more information, obviously, this is my email. That's our website at the bottom. And if I was to summarize a couple key points, first of all, please join the 600 or so organizations who have endorsed Climate Safe California, www.climatesafeca.org. Join Congressman Huffman and hundreds of others in endorsing Climate Safe California. Secondarily, participate in the proceeding before the PUC. We, the Climate Center, are a party, and we're formally filing comments, obviously, in what needs to happen. Thank you to Ken, 350 Bay Area, Indivisible, and others who have also been sort of submitting letters into the PUC, essentially expressing the same message. That's also important. And I think I'm barely under the wire with 10 minutes. So I'll stop talking and thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. That was very insightful. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We will definitely have time for questions, but I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next panelist, who is Ann Hoskins. Ann Hoskins leads the state and federal policy and regulatory advocacy for Sunrun, which is the leading residential solar and battery company in the United States. Previously, Ann has served as a commissioner on the Maryland Public Service Commission, as the head of policy and sustainability for a public utility, and also as a regulatory attorney. So I'm really excited for Ann. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now.
All right. Well, thank you, Yusra, and everybody who's joined us this morning to listen, and Ken for your great work in organizing this, and Kurt for kicking us off. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today. I've followed a lot of the great work that 350 Bay Area has been doing, and I just want to emphasize how critically important it is to have local voices in regulatory proceedings, in legislative proceedings. So I'm really happy to have a few minutes with you this morning. And Yusra, thanks for doing my slides, if you can switch. So first, just a moment about Sunrun. As was mentioned, we're now the largest distributed solar and battery company in the country and provider. And our most important market, largest market, is California. And the Bay Area is a very big and important part of that. We started here in the Bay Area 12 years ago, and really are, one of the really critical drivers now of bringing this future that Kurt just talked about and we heard about earlier this morning. And that is bringing power to people in their homes and now batteries that they can store, they can use to meet their own needs, but also share with the grid. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we've done over a pretty short period of time, which gives me a lot of optimism for what we can all do together to really tackle climate at a more local level. If we could go to the next slide. So I was asked to, actually before I get into that, and you all know this, so I don't have to say much about it, but obviously we are facing a really, dramatic climate impacts here in the Bay Area. I moved out here 4 years ago. The number of wildfires has been really alarming to me personally, and certainly to everyone who's been impacted, as well as the heat storms and just all the challenges that we faced. But it's also happening across the country. I came from the East Coast where we had many hurricanes around 2012, 2013, and it happened again here about a month ago where, millions of people were impacted by outages from and with an electric system that just cannot handle the climate challenges we're facing. And that really brings some urgency to how do we make a more sustainable and a cleaner and a more resilient energy system. And I think we have the capacity to do that. We just have to try to push for the right regulatory structures to make that happen. So Ken had asked me to touch a little bit, if we could switch to the next slide, to touch some on what does that mean in terms of reimagining a power grid from the ground up. And you know, today, as Kurt had mentioned, you know, we live in still a very centralized energy system that was created over 100 years ago, where we had centralized power plants, mostly fossil fueled, and a system of transmission, a transmission network that was bringing that power long distances, and then also distributing it through a more local distribution system managed by public utilities all over the country with their own franchises. And what we've seen certainly in California is that this centralized system isn't working. Certainly the fossil plants are creating harm to the public with pollution and carbon, but also the transmission system is frail and is costing billions of dollars to repair and to rebuild. And so it really is the time for us to question, you know, do we keep rebuilding and doing it the same way? Or do we find a way to put our resources more locally and build a more distributed system? You know, just like we saw with, you know, mainframe computers that became smaller over time, and we're now all looking at our own laptops probably, or maybe phones right now. You know, we now have technology that is bringing the power directly to the people, which means we shouldn't be relying on the same network. We don't need to rely on the same network. We need a new network. And so we are starting to go down that road. And one of the sort of technical, probably non-human centered words that's used are distribution system operators. So the idea there is that just like we have at the wholesale level, things that you've probably heard of, you know, the California ISO, there's these regional transmission organizations and system operators that have operated regionally with open access, so you can have competitive generators participate in that market. The concept now is that you could do a similar thing at the distribution, at the local level, where you don't have to have the utilities control the power generation as well as the network, but rather they could operate a network that, like a conductor of a symphony, I think of, where they can have an open network that allows multiple types of resources to come and participate, such as distributed solar on people's homes, or on a community center, such as the EVs we heard about earlier, where they could plug in and provide resources into the grid. And this really requires a different regulatory construct, because many utilities have earned their money and built their businesses by essentially building structures in the ground, you know, getting rate base for capital investments. And what we need to do is turn that around and provide incentives for them to encourage others to make these investments, because what we're seeing is it's the competitive providers at, we call the edge of the grid, who are driving costs down, who are bringing new technology into the market. And by doing that, we can recreate this grid. But I think, as Kurt said, this is really going to require a lot of regulatory change. It's going to require legislation like Senator Skinner's. It's going to require everybody rolling up their sleeves and really being willing to work to create a new regulatory construct so that we can really enable new providers to participate in this transformation. Yusra, good switch. So let me tell you a little bit how we're trying to do that at Sunrun. Our motto is to, or our goal is to create a planet run by the sun. We're making some progress. And one of I want to just give a few examples of some of the exciting developments really just in the last couple of years. One is, as I mentioned, at the wholesale market level, we have these things called ISOs, independent system operators. And Sunrun did bid to participate in providing what we call capacity, which is a commitment to be available to provide power in the future. And usually those commitments are made by centralized generation plants. A couple of years ago, we said, you know, we're going to put 5,000 rooftop solar and battery systems across New England. We committed to do that in 3 years. And we want to aggregate those, pull those together, and have you count that as capacity, just like you would a large power plant. And we won that bid. So we are in the process now of building out those, offering to customers solar and storage, with the goal of being able to be counted on and compensated for providing that capacity. They call that resource adequacy out here in California. So you may have heard of resource adequacy. It's called capacity in other parts of the country. We're also trying to work directly with utilities, who often we fight with on other issues. But in this case, we're trying to work with utilities to say to them, we know you have obligations to meet these needs for your customers. You have obligations to make sure you have a system that works. And so rather than just putting in a new transformer or a new substation, let's look if there's an alternative where we can avoid that. We can defer that by working together. And so we have recently entered into agreements, again, where we would aggregate these resources, hundreds of homes, thousands of homes, in Westchester, New York, in Southern Cal Edison, and most excited, which I'll give a little more to later, one of my favorites is an agreement we have with East Bay Community Energy right here in Oakland, where I'm calling in from. We also have a very big initiative underway in Hawaii with HECO. And then another approach we've done where it's not requiring a utility contract or a bilateral is we have been pushing for open access. Again, if you envision this distribution system that enables customers to just make their investment in solar and storage or an EV, and then be able to plug in and have a tariff that gives them compensation, providing that value, that's open access, right? It's not that they have to enter into a new contract. It's just something they're entitled to. And we have those systems, we call them BYOD, which is bring your own device, plug in your own battery, and you will get an incentive for doing so because you're providing value to the system. And so through these agreements, tariffs, bidding constructs, we are gotten ourselves to the point where we're meeting grid needs. We're providing capacity. Sometimes we're providing replacements to old, dirty peaking plants. We're enabling through here in California, where we have time of use rates, the ability to shave the peak and save everybody money by storing energy, sharing it to the later part of the day when it's so valuable and needed for the system, and then sharing that power. And we're able to also support transmission and distribution deferral, which can save billions of dollars. So when you hear people say that renewables are expensive, look into how expensive it is to upgrade and build additional transmission and distribution. It's incredible. Yusra? Thank you. Helping me with that. So here's the example I wanted to share right here in Oakland. This is something that's been led by the great folks over at East Bay Community Energy. And we've been really happy to partner with them in Oakland, down in West Oakland. It's one of the most polluted areas in the country, right? Between the confluence of the port, the trains that come through, the cars all over, and unfortunately, an incredibly old and dirty peaking power plant that is run with jet fuel. And so what we have done is we've reached an agreement where we're going to be put solar on rooftops that are going to serve 500 low-income housing units. And these will be aggregated and be part of the process to phase out this peaking plant. And that's exactly the types of this is the example that we really want to replicate all over California and all over the country, is that some of these, one of the biggest environmental justice issues is that these dirty facilities are often located, in low-income communities. They're not providing value. This plant doesn't run that often, thank goodness, but when it does, it's very expensive to run and it's very polluting, both carbon, but also just emissions. So we're really excited to be doing this and partnering with one of the leading CCAs in the state. Yusra.
And just a couple minutes, yeah.
Yep, this is my last slide, I think. So I wanted to end, there's so much more we could talk about, but I did want to end. I know we've talked about the microgrid proceeding, which is important. Sunrun is part of that as well. And we actually have a neighborhood grid proposal that I can try to get a paper that we can send around you might be interested in. But But also we have a very important proceeding that's about to kick off in California, and that's what they call the net metering proceeding. It's not a very human-centered name either. What is net metering? It is a critical regulation that enables people to get fair compensation for sharing their power back to the grid. And utilities do not like net metering. They make many claims about the impacts on the public, but there are so many social benefits, and we are definitely seeing that today, right? And I can give you an example. 3 weeks ago when they started, when we had all the heat storm and the ISO was going to shut down power, the CPUC came to us and asked us to make sure that our customers could share their power from their batteries. And by doing so, we and other solar and storage providers around the state helped prevent that. Remember, there were a number of warnings and then they didn't happen. They came to distributed providers. And this is something that is a big change from 4 years ago when net metering was last considered. And so it's really important. One of the issues that I want to push in this proceeding is to have a broader view of the social value of clean energy and the social value of distributed energy. And this is absolutely the wrong time to be cutting back on fair compensation for customers. So, there's a lot of, it's going to be a complicated proceeding. It's going to go on for about 1.5 years. And it's going to be really important that we have the voices from the communities who are most impacted by the legacy system to speak up and say, we really need to move forward. We need to make sure we have not only fair compensation, but we want to have incentives to encourage people to go out, make the investment in their batteries, make investments in solar, get it on schools, get it on community centers, and let's really move forward to see that vision of a more distributed and equitable system come to fruition. So if anyone is interested in learning about the upcoming net metering proceeding, please reach out to me. And I know that some of you are already involved, and I would just encourage you to let your voices be heard on this because it's going to be critical. So thanks again for your time, and I wish everybody a good day at the conference.
Thank you, Anne. That was wonderful. Amazing points made about, really tying in this concept of energy and resilience to low-income communities, and I think that's more relevant now than ever. We have a couple of questions for both Kurt and Anne before we move on to our next two incredible speakers. All right, so I do have one question actually for the panel, so Kurt and Anne, feel free to jump in. This question is from Kurt, and he's Kurt Larson. He's asking, in California specifically, who are the political and corporate organizations which are the largest opponents or roadblocks to taking climate action of the type that Kurt Johnson that you described? So any one of you can feel free to jump in.
Well, I think that we need to start with an understanding that there is a huge number of stakeholders who are very invested in the status quo. Not least of which the hundreds of thousands of people that are currently employed in the existing infrastructure, and keeping that going, including people that work for PG&E. So any plan going forward needs to have a robust provision for the sort of term of art is just transition, to make sure that people are currently employed in the status quo energy infrastructure system can have equal economic opportunities going forward. Note that in Governor Newsom's announcement earlier this week about transitioning to 100% zero emission vehicles, the executive order said words to the effect of the state will publish by July of 2021 the specific just transition provisions to make sure that people who are currently in the status quo are taken care of as we develop a new transportation system in California. That same policy principle needs to be embedded in whatever happens for accelerating California's renewable energy goals. Obviously, we at the Climate Center and many others think that the 2045 date for 100% clean energy needs to be accelerated to 2030. And just like Governor Newsom talked about just transition vis-a-vis transportation sector, the same principle needs to be applied to the electric sector. And so I think that kind of thing is possible, but it requires the prioritization of that just transition concept in state plans going forward. And not coincidentally, that will be a necessary precondition, I think, politically, in order for this to happen in California. I don't know, Anne, you want to talk about it?
Well, I think there's a really good point because, you know, it is going to require a very significant transition. You know, one of the utilities are obviously critical players here. When we talk about net metering, they have been, you know, the advocates for cutting back on that compensation. But as I mentioned, you know, I am really hopeful that we're going to be able to move the focus away from reducing investments in this area to how we can work together to, you know, create a process where the utilities can play the most productive role, which I think does go towards this DSO idea. And as I mentioned, we have a number of examples where we are partnering with utilities. So what I've been trying to say is, please don't make us spend the next year and a half fighting over this. Let's try to focus on what we can do together. Let's try to focus on how we can transition some of those employees into cleaner energy, how we can figure out how to make utilities more focused on service and, you know, less focused on being compensated for, you know, physical investments that they have to make. So, you know, but it is, you know, there's a lot of work to do on that. And I think Kurt is right that looking at the jobs issues and the jobs impacts are going to be an important element of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, both of you. Maybe we do have time for one more question that was just dropped, I think, for Anne, for you specifically. So Matt Levine, would you like to ask the question yourself, or if you can unmute yourself?
Thank you, everybody. I'm real excited to be a part of this. And on Monday, I was one of the people giving public testimony before the SF supervisors on the natural gas ban, or how about natural gas ban for new construction. And while most of the comments were very favorable, the plumbers union rep was one of the main concerns. So I was just wondering what the current relation with building trades is over the long-term growth in jobs versus short-term, or is that an area that's yet to be developed in terms of expanding the coalition and lining up partners for this transition?
I can try to take a crack at that, or Anne, if you want to. I mean, I think politically that will be important, and I think that the way to think about it would be, you know, the natural gas infrastructure. Well, there's a whole story about that, but we're going to need a transition to a hydrogen economy because in a lot of cases you're not going to have the well, if it's a solar-based generation resources, you're not going to have combined with storage. It's just not going to be physically possible. So there's going to have to be, in some case, perhaps a liquid fuel such as hydrogen, which is going to need to be plumbed. And so, you know, with state leadership recognizing the transition to a hydrogen economy, there would need to be a specific inclusion of everyone that's currently in natural gas to make them part of that transition to hydrogen. It's a much smaller molecule, and so you can't necessarily repurpose the existing natural gas infrastructure to hydrogen, you know, economy. So there are going to be a lot of jobs associated with building that hydrogen infrastructure, which I think will be necessary for this new clean energy resilience that we want to build.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add on that, except that it's absolutely critical if we can find a way to bring not just you know, there are a lot of different components of different unions in California. You know, the electrical unions have a very important role to play on all of this electrification, and how we can bring them in with the, you know, competitive carriers to figure out how everybody can play a role is going to be very important. So across the trades, I think, you know, groups like yours, like 350 Bay Area, could play a really important role in broadening this tent.
Incredible. Thank you both once again. And to all the participants, I am taking note of the questions that you're putting in the chat. Please keep them coming. It's truly engaging. And we will have time to get to those questions, but I'd really like to pass it on over to our next speaker. We have Joseph Weidman. Joseph Weidman is the Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for Peninsula Clean Energy Authority, which is San Mateo County's official energy provider. Joseph leads the peninsula's regulatory efforts before state and federal regulatory agencies and peninsula's legislative engagement, with a focus on providing energy consumers with affordable, reliable, and decarbonized energy options. So Joe, feel free to take it away.
So I am going to chat a little bit today about, first off, what are CCAs? Where are they? Just to make sure everybody has a basic understanding of who we are and what we do. Then I'll talk about, you know, as I think about how we get to 100% clean energy, the first obvious step is you have to provide the clean energy. So I was going to do a little talking about that. Then I think you also, as folks have been talking about, need to talk about electrification, which I call decarbonizing everything or electrify everything. And then we need to talk about innovation. There's going to need to be a lot of regulatory and programmatic efforts to figure out how we do this. And so those I thought would be things I would talk about and what CCAs are doing there. So next slide, please. Community choice aggregators are when cities, counties, or other localities come together to procure power on behalf of a group of people. It could be a single community, or like PCE, we have 20 cities in the county. So all of the cities in San Mateo County and the county itself have enrolled all of their residents in our program. So we go out and procure renewable energy resources and other you know, capacity resources, like you heard, resource adequacy for our communities. Then PG&E, SCE, or SDG&E, for us it's PG&E, ships that energy to our customers, and then PG&E bills the customers for our services and its delivery services. A lot of people ask, why is PG&E billing our customers for us? And that's because state law requires that. The utility owns the meter that's used to meter power. And so when CCAs were getting set up, we didn't want to fight the utilities on who should be doing billing, who should be sending the bill, and those types of things. And quite frankly, it's a lot easier just to have the distribution utilities infrastructure, which we pay for to do those things, just bill on our behalf. And that's what a lot of states actually do. So consumers only receive one bill. They're not confused. Even though that leads to its own confusion. Why are we on the bill? But that's the basics of CCAs. So at our core, we're about power procurement. But as I like to describe to people, that's not all a CCA can do, because we are a local government agency. And so we really go to what our mission is. And for PCE, that's decarbonization of power. And so it's not just about the procurement of power, but all the other things I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So then, you know, I thought it might be good to share with folks, where are CCAs operating? You know, and how have they been doing? And what you see on this slide is the areas in green are where existing CCAs where CCAs already exist. You can see some yellow spots in areas there. Those are where folks are looking at forming CCAs. And then in the gray areas, you can see regions where folks are considering the topic. You know, a lot of times we'll hear that CCAs are a coastal phenomenon. That is certainly where they started. If you look over on the right and you see the growth of CCAs, they did start. Marin Clean Energy was the first, and then this year is happily celebrating its 10th year anniversary. That is fantastic. They led the way. And as folks probably know, PG&E was not very happy with that, fought it very hard, and even tried to pass a state law that would have made it much harder to start a CCA. They failed. They spent a lot of money, but the voters saw through that effort, mostly because of the really great work that folks in Marin and at MCE did in unmasking what the arguments were really about, which was stopping folks from being able to aggregate their load to procure cheaper, cleaner power. So once MCE survived that, you saw Sonoma Clean Power form. And it's been steady growth year by year since then. And of course, as you can see, 2016, 2017, 2018 were a lot of growth. And you do see there in green, Placer County, Pioneer Community Energy is up in the Sierra foothills. We're not all coastal Bay Area entities like the claim is. And in fact, PCE has a policy of trying to help CCAs form where we have facilities in California. We have a 200 megawatt facility in Merced County near a town called Los Banos. Los Banos is voting to join PCE, and we are going to have that Central Valley community join us in our efforts and receive benefits from all the hard work we're doing. So it's spreading across the state and into regions that haven't historically been interested in CCAs. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the first step is affordable clean energy. Each CCA, and I have here for Peninsula Clean Energy because that's who obviously I'm most familiar with, has a default energy product. Ours is called Echo Plus. It's 50% renewable energy, 95% greenhouse gas free. Next year, it will be 100% greenhouse gas free, consistent with our board mandates, which means everybody in San Mateo County will be receiving greenhouse gas free energy at 5% less cost than PG&E's default generation rate. To date, that's saved our customers $55 million, which, you know, for the average residential customer is about $2.50 a month. For a lot of people, that can have a major impact on their ability to pay their bill. Small changes like that add up. We also offer an upgrade product, which is 100% renewable energy called Echo 100. And all of the CCAs, the 21 existing CCAs that I'm aware of have, you know, an upgrade product. About 2.1% of our communities have upgraded to this product. And we've worked with folks like Facebook and Visa and other large companies to upgrade their services to our products as an easy way for them to just green their energy supply without having to go out and contract for it themselves. So that's the first step. We have to get options for people to decarbonize. And it's surprisingly complex to do. And I'm sure, as you know, with the blackouts, folks are wondering what's being done to prevent those blackouts. And so if we could go to the next slide. Here you go, what CCAs are doing. We're building a lot of resources. This slide here is an aggregation of nearly all of the CCA's latest filings at the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, on what they plan to procure here in the near term to keep the lights on and continue the growth of renewable energy. And what you see is, you know, a fair clip. As the CCAs have been growing, our load has been growing, and we need to procure more clean energy resources to bring that to people. So you see there a nice mix. You have biomass, geothermal, hybridized solar is solar plus storage. There's also a lot of standalone storage that's being considered. Hybridized storage, it's very confusing. For me too, but that is basically because when you procure solar plus storage, if you do a 60 megawatt solar plant and you do a 60 megawatt storage facility, the hybridized solar counts the first part, but if that storage facility has multiple hours of discharge, hybridized storage captures those extra megawatt hours of discharge. And of course, some CCAs are looking at standalone storage, which doesn't have a generation facility attached to it, and wind. So we're building. You may hear that CCAs are not building resources, or we get blamed for the power outages that are occurring now. That's simply a false narrative. CCAs have been growing for a couple years now, and to blame us for what happened years ago when things weren't built and it takes time to build those is just false. We are building resources to serve our load, and CCAs are procuring the resource adequacy they need to keep the lights on. So that's the first step. We've got to buy and we've got to build. Next slide, please.
And Joe, one quick note, just about
Yeah.
2 to 3 minutes.
Oh, okay, sure. I'll hurry along. I get to talking. So
Great.
then, you know, there's the question of how do we decarbonize the rest? And what you see before you in this slide is San Mateo County's emissions inventory. That's where you start. Where are your emissions coming from? So you know where to focus your attention. Energy, because we're procuring more green energy, that slice is now about half of the 15% that it was. So we're now turning to buildings, which is 20%, and transportation, which is over half of our emissions. And if we want to get to zero, we've got to find ways to decarbonize those sectors. Next slide, please. So here's how we're doing that. We're doing a suite of electrification programs. You see we have a ride and drive campaign, incentives for new cars. We have incentives for used cars to activate that market. We also have a $28 million charging program in collaboration with the CEC that will result in 3,500 chargers being installed in the county, which will install more than double the current chargers in the county. Looking at building electrification, we have REACH code efforts where we're helping our communities develop building codes that are all electric. And then we offer a suite of incentives and workforce development and training to help folks put those REACH codes into action. And I will say that we are collaborating with, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We are collaborating with 5 CCAs on REACH code, so it's a Bay Area-wide effort. The Monterey area, East Bay, Silicon Valley, and Sonoma Clean Power are working with us on that. Next slide, please. And then if we look, oops, it did not put everything up on my slide. Maybe if you press the button again, oh, there it goes, thank you. So how do we innovate? Well, we're doing a lot of pilots and we're testing a lot of things. And that's where the CCAs, I think, really shine. We can implement programs to look at things like how do we smart charge vehicles so they don't charge at the wrong times and stress the grid. If you have older buildings in your community like San Mateo County, over 50% of our buildings were built in the 1950s. They don't have the capacity to do even level 2 charging. Can we use low power charging to charge vehicles at night there? How do we use vehicle to building technologies or vehicle to grid technologies to help keep the lights on? Curbside charging, local government fleet electrification. We're working with Lyft on electrification. We're working on resiliency with Sunrun to install over 4,000 batteries across the Bay Area with East Bay, Silicon Valley, and Palo Alto utilities to do the resiliency that Ann was talking about. We also have a medical program for folks so we can help keep their lights on if the lights go out and they have a medical equipment they need. And like Kurt talked about, we're also in the microgrids docket trying to navigate that issue and ensure that people have access to the data they need to build the microgrids. So across the space, and I could go on and on with the CCAs about the types of programs we have, but I just wanted to give you a flavor of the innovation. And I'll share a link with you right now, which I just did in the comments, which is you can see a nice chart of all the different programs that CCAs have. And if you live in a CCA service territory, you can see what your CCA is doing to accelerate these efforts. So I know that was a lot to absorb. I do apologize for that, but I hope folks found it valuable. Thank you.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I think that leads really well into a lot of the conversations that we've been having in the chat. So please keep that coming. Our next speaker will definitely speak a lot more to kind of what we've been hearing this morning. I'm really excited to introduce Jessica Tovar. She is the coordinator of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance, which has advanced local clean energy solutions by establishing a community choice program. East Bay Community Energy providing electricity to Alameda County and Tracy. By jumpstarting a just transition with a local development business plan, a Green New Deal for Alameda County with net revenues from East Bay Community Energy. As of 2019, they've won $5.6 million towards advancing clean energy programs and projects to build community energy resilience and wealth. So without further ado, Jessica, feel free to take it away. Thank you so much.
So community choice energy, we see it as a campaign opportunity for community benefit solutions. And we've been advocating for community choice for well over a decade, and really trying to get the policy and then actually get programs in the East Bay. So the current clean energy system that we have right now and that the monopoly utility maintains is the remote energy system, which we've talked about how it is very problematic because you do have to use energy to transmit energy to the places where it's used. On top of that, we get charged for the transmission and the delivery. And this is a structure that monopoly utilities want to maintain power in, and we have no control over it, right? And to acknowledge these systems are often in deserts where we're constantly told that, you know, dump it or put it over there, but the reality is that there are desert communities and complex ecosystems of flora and fauna to acknowledge in the deserts. And we know that the transmission wires are very volatile. It's an old system and it's not the system that we would put in place. You know, if I had control of this situation, it'd be very different. We'd be focusing on local clean energy, right? So one of the things I want to acknowledge that comes from monopoly utilities is there's a lot of false information and spin that's put out to really divide and conquer different communities, including labor, the clean energy community, the environmental justice community. And to add to that, there's this constant spin of us being told that, you know, that clean energy is only for a luxury for the wealthy, and that the more we incentivize that the costs are shift onto other communities that can't afford that system. And that's because we live in a capitalist system, right? And so what I'm really asking folks is to realize that that spin really only benefits the monopoly, and it exists to divide and conquer. So I did add an image of equitable energy choice for Californians. Monopoly utilities create front groups of color, of nonprofits that they give money to, of chamber of commerces that maintain, you know, supporting monopoly utilities. So this is an example of a front group, and they intervene at the CPUC status and perpetuate this divide and conquer that benefits the utility. So I want to just share that with you. I share this with reporters. They've recently scrubbed the existence of equitable energy choice on the internet just to speak to how dirty this all goes down, okay? So one of our, well, several of our goals that we established for establishing a community choice has been to prioritize local clean energy, or that distributed energy resources that we've been talking about, providing affordable and stable rates for electricity, providing more clean energy than California state's mandates and that PG&E offers, right? Create good family sustaining clean energy jobs locally, and also really emphasize the local community ownership and control of clean energy assets here at home, and improving our community health and safety. Just to note, my background is environmental justice, and so just really uplifting communities that have been dumped on by dirty energy for way too long. Including community in decision-making processes and governance is very important to us. So East Bay Clean Power Alliance, our organization, Local Clean Energy Alliance, Sierra, Local Sierra Club, and various other social justice, environmental justice organizations, we advocated for a local development business plan, which is pretty much a commitment of our community choice program to invest in building local clean energy assets over time. So this local development business plan is our roadmap of how to do that. Our decision makers actually sided with us back in 2016, provided $500,000 to do this study, okay? And what it really is how to do a local Green New Deal in our communities over time. So our program in Alameda County is East Bay Community Energy, which was mentioned already. And it started providing electricity back in 2018. And we'll just keep going. So the work I do is I'm an energy democracy organizer. We work with communities on the ground, grassroots community groups, local activists in understanding the energy system. And many of us have been really disenfranchised, and this is intentional because once people understand something, they have the power to speak up. And that's what we've been doing, is just working with community groups and engaging them on the energy system that we need to work for everyone. Here are some photos from some of our meetings where we work with different community groups, with youth, with families, folks of color. We also work with some of the disabled community, elderly community. And we have recently, since COVID shut down, we've been trying to participate as much as we can over social media, as well as attending online Zoom decision-making meetings and testifying to our local board. So this is what energy democracy would look like to us. So one of the things that we're really emphasizing, and the whole point of our local development business plan, is really how to bring clean energy benefits to people who have been traditionally shut out of the clean energy economy, specifically vulnerable communities. And here I name them: Black, Indigenous, people of color, low income, the elderly, the disabled, the detained, youth, immigrants, veterans, the unhoused, women, LGBTQIA communities. And these are all the communities, and this isn't this list, I'm sure there's somebody we missed, but the intent is to uplift these communities and have access to clean energy too. So really thinking about how do we do this for renters, for multifamily housing, for housing projects, transitional housing, for example, tiny villages for the unhoused, really thinking outside of the box of ownership, right? So one of the other things we're really emphasizing from our local development business plan is other ways to finance. So this is just an example of on-bill repayment, using your savings on your bill to actually pay for a solar and battery system, as opposed to upfront money or having to take out loans, right? Because many of our communities don't have, good credit or a credit rating. And so we have to think outside of the box. And one thing I want to highlight is we do have a cooperative, people-powered solar cooperative that has spun up in the East Bay, and they're using this model to be able to bring those clean energy benefits to people who can't afford to pay for a system or take out a loan. So this is really important for us. Didn't come out. Oh, there it is. It's just slow. So one of the things I want to just emphasize right now that we're fighting within East Bay Community Energy is the inclusion of nuclear energy from PG&E's Diablo Canyon. We don't have nuclear in our clean energy future. Our vision is about true clean energy, and the acceptance of nuclear energy pretty much would shift to indigenous communities where this stuff is mined and dumped. That is not environmental justice. We do not support that. So when our decision makers and our East Bay Community Energy talks about carbon-free energy, we have to really emphasize that what they're talking about is large hydroelectric dams. And right now they're trying to really hard to include nuclear energy. We fought and beat this back in April. About 64 community members speak out against nuclear. We want to keep it out in 2020, but now they're voting to consider it for 2021, all the way up until the closure of Diablo Canyon, which we would need your support. If you live in Alameda County or City of Tracy, there will be a decision made October 21st, and potentially another hearing happening later in the year. So just a heads up. So lastly, I want to emphasize the organization I work for, the Local Clean Energy Alliance, is a very small organization, but we get a lot done, and we're mostly volunteer based. I'm also a Roddenberry Fellow from in my fellowship. Energy is at the center of our economic, environmental, and social problems. Our communities must reclaim energy as a solution to those very problems. We are using community choice energy revenues to fund a Green New Deal to make these clean energy solutions possible in Alameda County. And last but not least, I will say clean power to the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. We're so honored to have that presentation, and it's such a great way to kind of end these presentations, because that environmental justice aspect is incredibly important to highlight during these clearly very divisive times in our world today. And again, we are inviting questions, and we'll definitely get into some audience questions, which I'm excited for. But we'd kind of like to start off the conversation with a question to any of our panelists. Feel free to jump in. Do you think that this modernized grid aspect of getting to 100% clean energy are we discussing, is it better at saving us costs, in quotes? So, or is it also more equitable in this current state of climate change? So any of you can kind of give your thoughts.
Well, I don't look at it as an either or. You know, I sort of, when I think about climate change and its impacts, there are enormous costs. And, you know, those are hard to capture when you say, is this idea we're putting forward cost effective? Those metrics to define cost effectiveness, particularly in the future, I think are very ill-defined when it comes to the impacts of climate change, the benefits of a resilient community and societal continuity. You know, they're undervalued. And so, you know, when I think about the transformations the four of us are talking about and this group is interested in, I find that, you know, cost is not something, you know, that sort of should be placed in opposition, right? And I think if we're thoughtful, we can have a more equitable outcome. But as Jessica talks about, that requires sustained presence by folks like yourself at, you know, I work at a CCA, so just speaking about CCAs, so that the board understands what the community wants. Because they're driven by the board, and, you know, obviously staff tries to support that effort, but it really takes the voices of the community to determine what the community should do, and then we implement it.
I would just refer people back to Mark Jacobson's comments when he sort of, you know, looked at the costs of the business as usual trajectory that we're currently on, and that has not been the way we've been thinking about these issues, and that's the sort of the framing problem that needs to be overcome. And hopefully these kinds of conversations can help accelerate that reframing of thinking about these issues, you know, at a national level and even at a local level. You know, an additional sort of more granular point, I mean, it's just about resilience specifically, I mean, there were huge costs associated with the power outages of 2019 and 2020. Lives lost associated with failure of electricity. Billions of dollars in economic losses associated with the PS events that we saw that were very extended in 2019. Plus even just the wildfire costs. We're talking tens of billions of dollars of costs of these wildfires. So I guess I'm echoing Joe. It's basically going back to Mark Jacobson, which is if we have a broader frame of thinking about costs, then those concerns will hopefully go away.
Sure. Great. So kind of leading on to that is a question from Jan. Jan, if you would like to unmute yourself, please feel free and ask your question, or I can ask it for you as well.
I'm here.
All right. Yeah, feel free.
Wonderful subjects, everyone. We're all on the right track. And I'm just so proud of being part of Clean Power Alliance, the CCA for LA County, Ventura County, and about 25 cities. So and my county serves more customers with 100% renewable energy than any in the nation. We're also the fastest warming county in the nation. And I hear advocates of many other CCAs, including now the policy of Monterey Bay is to not offer this 100% renewable energy as the default for new customers. And it's been so successful here. And I just wonder if there's a way that we could kind of like get past the rhetoric and the I don't know, kind of like talking points and really get to the data of like, who is it really hurting that Clean Power Alliance has offered this to the cities, and that the cities have taken it so successfully. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Jessica, feel free to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the things I want to emphasize is our program up here, East Bay Community Energy, didn't offer a renewable 100. We had to fight and advocate for it. And so the renewable 100 actually comes at a premium. It is a few dollars more compared to the other energy, the default, which originally had a 1.5% discount compared to PG&E. So the issue with that is there's two things. Community choice means that the consumer should have a choice of getting either the discounted or making that commitment, that educated decision to say, you know what, I'm okay with paying a little bit more per month. I'll go with renewable 100. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that so I think you mentioned earlier that and FARA programs, these are discount programs. What we've learned in research is that there is about 35% of customers, of people who are eligible for Karen FARA, but are not enrolled in the program. So we don't want to make a decision to increase their bill, especially knowing that people are struggling with their electricity bills. We don't want to make that decision for them. And as a matter of fact, we encourage community choice programs and activists to talk to each other and have discussions about this so people know that that's an option and sign up for it themselves. People like me, no, I'm kind of an anomaly, but the people we work with, they don't know about all these details, they don't understand, and we're trying to do that education. We don't want to be paternalistic and make decisions for them. We want to do this equitably and ethically. And so that's why we are really doing a lot of education, especially about what is equity and who are vulnerable communities. And just to add to this, we're dealing right now, since the COVID shutdown, an unprecedented amount of electric utility debt. And that's one of many utilities, many bills that people are going to be facing coming into 2021. And the CPUC, just to put it out there, the way they've approached this is if you can pay your bill on time every month for the next 12 to 18 months, we might forgive your debt. This is not this is literally, I see this as a human rights issue, that a lot of people's power is about to be shut off. So for all those reasons, we can't make that decision for the people who are hurt by poor energy decisions and the mass costs that only benefits the utilities. Thank you for asking that question.
I would just jump in, and I think that Joe is the better guy to answer this question, but you know, I live in Marin County. Our CCA, MCE has said, I believe, I don't know, that they're saying that their default product will be 100% greenhouse gas free, I think by 2023, something along those lines. It's important to, you know, we get into sort of nomenclature issues. Well, what does that mean, greenhouse gas free? If you sort of, you know, go behind the curtain, that will include, among other things, you know, purchases of large hydro from WAPA, from the Northwest. And so, you know, people have different views about that. The California's RPS, a bunch of reasons for this, but it doesn't include a large hydro and so on and so forth. The SB 100 2045 100% clean energy target was written in a way that would automatically in 2045, you know, make eligible, you know, all hydro regardless of size, as well as nuclear. And there has sort of politics associated with how that went down. But I guess it's, you know, there might be some people would criticize MCE for sort of saying, well, we're going to be 100% greenhouse gas free by 2023. And then, you know, some people might not like some of those, you know, resource inclusion decisions. But there are a bunch of reasons for that having to do with economics, and it's a little bit tricky. But anyway, why don't I shut up and let Joe see if you can take this, because this is a hard question.
Well, it is a tough question. We're not, you know, nobody has a crystal ball or, you know, a pathway to get us to 100% renewable energy every hour of the day yet. PCE's board has set out a goal for us, though, to try to figure this out by 2025. In our modeling of our energy use, we can get to about 90% renewable energy, so 90% of the hours, pretty easily. It's that last 10% that is really hard. It's in these times when the sun is not shining for days on end, or the wind isn't blowing as much as it usually does for, you know, hours on end, that are very difficult to predict and then plug that hole. But we are working on it. And our modeling is showing that it's technically doable, but that the cost is a chunk. And that's something to think about. It's about 30% more in our modeling. So, you know, that's not a trivial amount, but we're working on it, and we're working consistently on it. And you know, we want to lead in that area because it is the key question. I see a lot of folks in the comments asking, how do we get to 24/7? Well, I guess I said again, you know, 860, you know, hours a year. Well, we're working on that, and we have that as a goal because we know that's actually what real carbon reduction is. Right now, somebody asked in the comments about how do you do 100% renewable energy for, you know, our 100% renewable energy product. We'll be honest, it's on an annual basis. That's currently where the accounting is at. So we look at your energy use over the year, and we procure enough renewable energy to offset that usage. The reality is that at night, that is likely not renewable energy that you're using, but overall, we're buying enough to offset you. That's the second best solution. We're working on the first. 24/7, how do we do that?
Thank you so much for that question, Jan. That really stimulated the conversation forward. I'd like Kelly, you've had your hand raised, so if you'd like to unmute yourself, if that's okay.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, so I have 2 questions, and one is, can I cover my entire house with solar now? What would it take to be allowable? What do we need to do to make it allowable that any one of us that could cover our house with solar can go ahead and do that? And then my second question is, anybody working on legislation for our cities that have been burned down by fire, that when they rebuild, they have to be with renewable energy, all electric? So those are my 2 questions.
Yes, feel free, Ken.
I can try to jump in. So yes, you can cover your house with solar now. The new Title 24 building codes, which take effect in January of 2021, or maybe actually, I forget, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, it might be right now, but all new construction per the latest Title 24 update is requiring the installation of solar, which is
That's correct.
Which is going to dramatically ramp up the penetration of rooftop solar. And so all those that are homes that are being rebuilt post-fire would presumably be in compliance with the latest state requirements that rooftop solar has to be part of that new construction. And
Okay.
I could be wrong, but that's my understanding.
But I'm asking to make them all electric, that they, we're not putting gas back in, we're running us towards us. And if I only need like 6 panels on my house, but I can put 20 on, can I do that now? So that I become a virtual power plant.
You cannot. At least, well, you can, but you can't use net metering if you do that. Net metering is designed only to offset your load. But if you want to talk to a solar developer and enter into a wholesale power agreement with the utility, you can. It's just not usually cost effective to do that on rooftop solar. So it is an option for you to do, but I mean, you'll find out pretty quickly it's not cost effective.
But are we trying, if we're trying to be all electric and all renewable, are we working on legislation for people to be able to put on way more solar than what they actually need, so that we don't have to have these desert power plants, that we just cover the roofs that we already have? My house is 100 years old.
So
I'm all electric now.
the answer to your question is, yeah, we should absolutely get to that world where you could be paid very simply for excess solar generation, which would, per the laws of physics, realistically speaking, be serving your immediate neighbors. So we don't have yet what I glossed over this very briefly, but we want to live in a world where there is an open local electricity market, just as there is currently an open transmission level wholesale electricity market. We need an open local distribution electricity market so that people like you would be paid at a value commensurate with the value which you are in fact providing to the broader grid. There's all sorts of reasons why PG&E doesn't want that to happen. But if we can reimagine a whole new structure, which is what we're trying to do through legislation, then once that local open electricity market is regulatorily and legislatively created, then yes, the price signals would be in place so that everyone that has excess ability to generate on their existing property will do so. And in most cases, you're going to wind up selling power to your neighbor across the street. There's a whole story there associated with PUC rules prohibiting you from selling to the neighbor across the street. But once that's possible, you will do that at a rate which is going to be most likely less than what your neighbor across the street is currently paying PG&E. There's all sorts of stories about the stranded costs that need to be securitized in order to sort of make this all possible. But it can be done. It just takes a political will from the governor and the legislature and the PUC to understand the vision for the future that we can build and make it happen. We just we're not there yet.
Right. Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Laura Stokes, you had a question in the chat, if you'd like to ask it.
Thank you. I was just wondering what the difference is between Modesto Irrigation District, where I live in Modesto. I asked them if they knew we had a climate emergency and what they were doing about it, and if they'd heard of CCAs, and they told me that they were better than CCAs and that they were meeting all of the state goals for the environment at this time. So I'd kind of like to know what the difference is between Modesto Irrigation District and a CCA, and what the chances are of switching to a CCA if there's something in it for the local customers, or Modesto Irrigation District is. Thanks.
Sure, I can address that. So Modesto Irrigation District is an energy provider, but they're similar to sort of PG&E. They do both the procurement of energy and the distribution and delivery of energy. They're a public agency. So in a CCA, we only do the procurement of energy. We use other folks' wires, PG&E's wires, to deliver. CCAs are not allowed to operate in like public utility service territories. So that would include Modesto Irrigation District. We can't even form there or offer service. Similar, what's going on with us in Los Banos is there's Merced Irrigation District for about half the county. We're talking to the other half of the county because we can't compete with the other public agencies like that. So that's kind of in a nutshell the relationship there. And that's kind of the basic difference. They're an integrated procurement and delivery provider. We just do procurement.
So I'm curious, are they like municipal utilities or different than that?
Well, they're similar to a municipal utility. Their agency is an irrigation district. And what happened is those were started to handle the pumping of water around California for irrigation. And because those loads are so big, they're a big entity. And they said, well, we can offer service to rural customers who may not get it otherwise, like way a long time ago, right? In the 30s and 20s when they were formed. And so they offered service to the surrounding communities. They're well run, well managed, but generally they're not on the forefront of sort of renewable energy and electrification like the CCAs are. It's just different philosophies and education of what's possible. We have very good conversations with Merced Irrigation District about what we can all do together.
I would just chime in that the beautiful part about, munis is that they are publicly, governed, and as such would be subject to the sort of the ability of the local populace to come in and recommend aggressive changes to the status quo. So I would argue that the CCAs are sort of leading innovation for that reason, because they're closest to their customers. The munis are also potentially close to their customers for the same reasons. So having the kind of programs that the CCAs are developing, and developing microgrids in particular, is something that can happen soonest in munis because they control the wires. And so there could be some really innovative things happening at munis if the locals are advocating vociferously to make that happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those questions. And we hope that these kind of incited some, at the very least, action items that we can take going forward. And with that, I think it would make sense for Jed to come in, and he is going to kind of allow us to get together, fill out our contact information if we'd like to keep in touch with each other after the workshop. So Jed, would you like to?
Sure. Thanks, everyone, and thank you for spending your time with us this morning. My name is Jed Holtzman. I am the Senior Policy Analyst for 350 Bay Area, and I help Ken Jones, who you heard from earlier, run our clean energy campaign work. So, you know, the goal of being here today and these other webinars that we've had, and first of all, I want to give a huge shout out to our fantastic speakers. I learned a ton today, and I'm sure you all did as well. So in addition to learning, of course, we're in a climate emergency, and part of the climate emergency mobilization is to mobilize and start to get some of the work done, moving the balls forward on the things that we heard about today. And so I'm gonna kind of do a quick wrap up to that end. Gonna go ahead and put this link in the chat. And basically what we're asking is for folks, this is going to open up to a Google spreadsheet, and this is going to ask folks for your name, your email address, and your city primarily. And the reason that we're asking for that is because what we'd like to do is keep people, so let me back up for 1 second. 350 Bay Area's clean energy priorities were pretty clearly explicated by all of the speakers today. So making community choice energy programs all they can be, with respect to both customer-facing program features, incentives, as well as grid management and their role in the state energy system. Number two, local build-out of renewables and efficiency and demand response in our communities with local workforce development in disadvantaged and impacted communities. And number three, decentralization and localization of both energy generation and grid management for resiliency, life and death safety, and community benefits. So these are really our three major priorities, and I think that you really heard Joe, Jessica, Kurt, and Ann respectively talk about those issues really heavily. So in addition to everything that they were able to mention in their very short 10 minutes, each of these folks could have gone for an hour. There's tons of work that wasn't even brought into the room today to basically move these big goals forward on a number of different fronts. And what we would love is for all the 45, 50 people in the room today to be able to effectively work together going forward, if you're interested, in moving some of this forward. And a lot of that is going to happen at your city and county level, but really a lot of it's going to happen at your CCA level. And so the reason we're asking for the city in the spreadsheet is because we're going to group you in by city to kind of connect you with other people in this panel workshop who are part of your local CCA community. So connect you with other customers in your same CCA to get together and push all of the things that we've been talking about, as well as you know, other energy issues that 350 Bay Area and other organizations that are participating today would want to work towards. We pretty much are all working towards the same goals. And so I just want to highlight again, the bit.ly link I put into the chat. We're not really looking to, you know, build a, you know, send you fundraising emails or anything like that. This is really to keep the people in this workshop connected so that basically starting next week, we can actually do something besides just having listened and learned. And I will leave it there with just, again, appreciation to Kurt, Joe, Jessica, and Ann for their great presentations, and to Yusra and Ruth for their facilitation.
Thank you, Jed. That was wonderful. And yes, please feel free to fill out that spreadsheet that he linked in the chat so that all of us can continue this conversation moving forward. In the last few minutes, we have a quick video that we'd like to share. I believe Kurt had shared this video with us, and I think it does a great job of kind of putting us in that right frame of mind as we go and into our groups afterwards. So I will share.
Actually,
yes.
I didn't have that queued up. Ken, do you have that handy?
Yes, I do. I'm going to share my screen and it's right there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Right. Hopefully all of you can see that. So I think that video kind of helps summarize the amazing conversations we've had today. Thank you all once again. Really appreciate it.